So my talk today, I wanted to talk about how to speed the transition from oil and gas to renewable energy, and to talk about how we can build that from many different perspectives. As a young person and as a White House Environmental Justice Advisor who joined in 2020, I've seen the power of education and about teaching young people about how to be change makers and how to take part in democracy and advocate for our future. From the first part of taking a policy, I just took off on a Friday and joined a local organization called Citizens Climate Lobby to go and testify for the Clean Energy DC Act, which is the most aggressive decarbonization bill in the country at the time, which is working to make sure that renewable energy was the standard and that coal, oil, and gas were not allowed to be able to be the default for so many homes across the city. And also, it would actually overlook and be a standard that other cities could use, such as like the Green Cities Forum here. And from that point on, I saw from testifying and by talking to DC council members about the need for sustainable energy, that went from them not believing in climate change as being a serious issue they can talk about, to all of them unanimously understanding that we must take urgent action, into the bill passing, and by seeing to this day so many actions taken across Washington, D.C. and across America to make sure that we're decarbonizing in the next 5.5 years. And from that, I continued organizing my community with a Sunrise Movement and with 0 Hour and Fridays for Future, and joined other young people to take a stand and show that we need climate action and to tell the truth to elected officials and speak truth to power. A lot of that came down, and a lot of us were mobilized by the education system, by our education system not teaching us about climate change and not telling us about the urgency. But some of us that were in Washington State or were in New York City who had climate education felt empowered enough to actually go to elected officials and say, hey, I just learned this in class. I just learned that solar panels can actually lower our energy bills. I just learned that I can actually be trained in building wind turbines. And they went to their school and were able to take action from that. It was from empowering young people through a curriculum that's intersectional and equitable and taught them the science of the climate crisis that moved the conversation forward. So much of climate change action is stymied right now because of the fact that we're fighting whether it's real or if it's not, whether we need to take action now or later. But if we had an equal standing point, a moment where we could have a discourse that is substantive and real and urgent, then we could start and actually set targets that are measurable and at the scale of the crisis. As soon as we started organizing, creating coalitions with Fridays for Future, and seeing us turn from hundreds to thousands to millions, we saw the need for our generation to be educated. And that transformed us into going into university now. With COVID-19, a lot of the youth climate strike movement has fizzled away because we want to also enjoy our passions outside of climate activism. But it all circled back. It circles back to environmentalism being at the heart of everything that we do. And that sped up our transition in college and in university to go and study political science and climate science and actually put our work and our activism into tangible action. And an example of this is my work at Harvard University. I took a class on international environmental governance, policy, and social justice. And one thing I took away from doing research for about 3 months is that I was able to understand that our current economic system that focuses on coal, oil, and gas is not compatible with the future that we want to see. For us to actually make that transition and to make it fast is for us to actually structurally change how we see our GDP and to actually include natural resources like Borneo, how they have so much of natural resources from water to rainforests and to the plethora of biocultural diversity that they have within their country. If we were able to value that on the international stage and to see them not only for the wood and not only for the exploitation that we can extract from the country, but of the ingrained contribution that they're giving to the world, then we could actually speed up our transition. We have to change the way in which we look at the earth, change the way in which we look at nature, not see the forest for wood, and not see rivers for water bottles, and not see everything to be a capitalist exploit. We have to go back to our natural cycles and go back to indigenous and black culture where we were stewards to nature and we appreciated it and lived in tune with it. That will speed up our transition as well. Leading back into the grassroots of the movement, we have to look at the earth in the allegory of a tree. If we look at one tree and look at all the roots, look at all the branches, look at all the trunk of it, and we're trying to make change from one part of it, we have to start at the base of it. We have to start at all the interweaving, interlocking, intersectional roots that ground the tree. And that starts from changing our stance and changing the way in which we look at investments. If we want a new tree to grow and to not just be the same iteration of the same problem, of the same system that got us where we are today, then we have to plant new seeds from a totally different root. And that starts from rejecting capitalism as the form of economic system and actually reforming it to a system in which we're working with indigenous people. That starts from reparations, that starts with giving land back, that starts with actually making sure that we're ending fossil fuel subsidies today. And that we're ending all new construction of fossil fuels today. We're talking about how there's been so much of a phase-out system and so much of, oh, well, we might have to wait until 2050 before we can start making new things. We already have pre-existing infrastructure. We have abandoned coal mines that are all across Europe that can be reused in a sustainable way, that can be actually activated as wind turbines and as solar panels and as creating ways for us to be able to speed up that transition. Because if we have to wait for 10 years for the construction of a new offshore wind plant or for the construction of a solar plant, then it's going to take even longer. We have to start with just reusing, restoring, and going back to what we know as just working with nature and working with what we already have and not waiting for new things to come along. In my experience as in the past 2 years, the White House Environmental Justice Advisor, I've seen in working with federal agencies that oftentimes our efforts are slowed down because of the fact that there's so much red tape and so many people that are willing to stop change because they see one tiny detail that's off and saying, oh, wait, let's actually do an entire review. One example of this is I joined for the Justice 40 initiative, which is an initiative making sure that 40% of all investments in renewable energy go to frontline communities. When I joined in 2020, we had done 6 months of action beforehand. There have been advisors who have been working all across the country, getting data, getting statistics for us to be able to take action day one when we get in there. But after we started our recommendations, a 40-page letter that we sent to every federal agency, from the environmental ministry to the FEMA, which is our emergency response department, to the Department of Defense. We sent the letter to every single one of them. And action was slowed down because it took them a year to review what we had and to double check what we had and triple check what we had and go into the community to do the same work over and over again and say, oh, this data doesn't fit, because Black communities aren't represented in census data, that Indigenous communities aren't seen as land because technically they're property, and that this is actually under jurisdiction, or that Puerto Rico isn't technically a state. All this red tape slows down progress, and we have to actually look beyond that and say, hey, let's put this research into action. Let's not just continue collecting data infinitely. That's what we're in a holding pattern seeing. Every time I go into a White House meeting, and every time we're going to these political spaces, we're just asking for the same thing to happen over again. We have to end the cycle and end the loop and work and actually start with making sure the Inflation Reduction Act and acts like it are passed. In the beginning of our activism, we advocated for a Green New Deal and for mass mobilization to reach us to 100% sustainability by 2030. That was our demand. And it's been whittled down to this bill now that is only reaching us 40% of what we need. That's slowing down action, but us not being ambitious enough to actually look into the details and say, actually, we can make sure that these funds go into preventative infrastructure and not reactionary infrastructure. We need to make sure that we're transitioning our cities so that we don't have zoning where we can't have homes or single-family homes that isolate people from public transport. It's an entire whole of government solution that we have to do. It's not just isolating the environmental sector and saying everything else is sectioned off. When we work in collaboration with each other and looking beyond our differences, that's when change can happen. I know everyone in this room knows that and is working to make that happen. So I'm excited to be a part of this and to see what this panel has and see what everyone's talking about. Thank you so much.